This underwater sea creature was created using a crayon resist painting technique. To do this project, you will need a piece of watercolor paper. If you don't have watercolor paper at home, a heavy weight drawing paper will do. You'll need a pencil, you'll need some paintbrushes, watercolor paints, some water, and a crayon. I used a white crayon for my sea creature so that my lines would not show up until I painted with my watercolors. If you want the pebbly background, you might also like to add some salt. Coarse salt like sea salt works best. So to get started, I have drawn my sea creature on another piece of paper. To draw your sea creature, you might want to break it down into basic shapes. For my turtle, I used an oval for the body, a circle for the head, some pointed ovals for the legs, and a triangle for the tail. I also added some shapes on the shell. Once you have your sea creature drawn, you can take your crayon and go over all of the lines of your drawing. You'll want to press fairly hard because you need a good layer of wax to resist the paint. I've also added some patterns on my creature inside all of its shapes. You'll see those when I paint. When you're done doing all of your lines, you're going to take a paintbrush and wet your paper. A large paintbrush works best for this process. If you don't have a large paintbrush, you could use a sponge. The first part of the project uses a wet on wet technique. So the paper is wet and you're adding wet watercolors. When you have a good layer of water on your paper and you add your wet watercolors to it, your colors should spread. I'm going to take another paintbrush and I'm going to use some colors that I'd like to have in my background for my water. If your sea creature is darker than your watercolor, you don't need to worry about going over the top of your sea creature. If it's lighter, you might want to try to go around it carefully. Don't limit yourself to one color for your water. You might want to experiment with adding some different colors to your background and mixing some colors. My turtle is going to be darker than my water, so I'm not concerned about the fact that I have some of my watercolor in my turtle. But if you have color that has gone into your sea creature where you did not want it to be, you can take a paper towel and use that paper towel to just gently blot those areas, take away some of the color. All right, I think I have to add a little bit more color down here. You can see that on the wet paper, the color really spreads into those areas. All right, once you're happy with your background, then you're going to use another brush a tinier brush to fill in your sea creature. When you work with your paints, try not to let them be too liquidy. Stir them around a little bit so that they're a little thicker and they won't run as much. And you can see as I paint over my sea turtle that I did a good layer of crayon. The crayon is resisting the paint, so I can see pretty much all of my details of my turtle shell. I'm going to add my color for my legs, tail, and head. And again, if you get a color somewhere where you did not want it to be, you can use a paper towel to blot that up and patch up your color. And don't be afraid to mix and blend colors on your sea creature as well. Now to get that pebbly, bubbly surface that I talked about in the beginning, I used some sea salt. So that part we will do before the background dries. I'm going to add some thick brown paint for the eyes. And now I'm going to take my sea salt and I'm going to sprinkle the salt right onto my wet water background. And as my paper dries, the salt will absorb some of the color. You can see it starting to pull some of the color off the paper already. And if you wanted to add anything else to your picture, like grasses or coral or other sea creatures, you certainly could add those to the background. You might even want to add some lines for currents in the water. And I'm going to let my painting dry completely. When the painting is dry, then I will rub the salt off, and that's how I will get all those nice bubbles in my water. And that's all there is to it. I hope you enjoyed that. Can't wait to see what you create.